2 weeks after I overheard my own daughter whisper, "Why is she still alive?" The police walked her past our lemon tree in handcuffs because the new owners of my house called them, and I was the one who convinced everyone to let her go. That's the middle of the story. Here's how we got there. I am 70, and until recently I lived in a house people in magazines call stately, a place with a roofline like a signature and a price tag that makes strangers curious about the contents of your heart. The last appraisal fixed the number at $15 million, and if that sounds like boasting, forgive me. The number is a character in the story. It overhears things. It changes voices. It makes people lean forward when they should sit back. My daughter is named Lark, a lovely name for a woman who never learned that mornings are for listening. She is 42, and if ambition were a person it would borrow her stride. She speaks in bullet points that sound like manifestos, wears sneakers so white they announce themselves, and has a way of clasping a coffee cup that makes advice look inevitable. 6 months ago, she moved into the East Guest Suite for a season, which is a poetic way to say she never intended to ask permission. She had a plan, as she always does, for a business that would help women who stepped off their career ladder and wanted to climb back on. I agreed that the world needs ladders. I did not agree to become the wood. The night I heard the sentence, "Why is she still alive?" the house smelled like cedar and laundry soap. I was in my dressing room. The small annex Harold had paneled for me on our 20th anniversary. Harold believed in craftsmanship and kindness, two things that make grief heavier when it arrives. He died 8 years ago, and sometimes I still put my hand on the arm of his blue chair when I pass it, the way you touch a railing without noticing. Lark was in the next room with a friend who called herself a marketing consultant, but who sounded like a mirror with opinions. They were flipping through mood boards, naming brands aloud as if speaking them summoned their momentum, when my floor, old redwood, generous with sound, carried that whisper across the threshold. "Why is she still alive?" Lark said, not in a horror story way, but in a problem-solving way, the tone people use when a stubborn file refuses to download. My hand went cold around my glass of water. I set it down the way surgeons set scalpels, carefully, because precision is what stands between harm and healing. Grief is not always a sob. Sometimes it's a very quiet room. I had jokes at the ready. Alive because I eat tomatoes, or alive because your father taught me how to budget my pulse. None of them were as useful as silence. I stayed where I was and let the words walk around in me until they tired themselves out. When they finally sat down, I stood. Tea is the grandmother's emergency brake. I boiled water I didn't want and watched it calm itself. By the time the kettle sighed, Lark's friend had said her goodbyes and my daughter had moved to the kitchen island with her phone, lighting her face as if a screen could stand in for a sunrise. "Mom," she began, and the word chose a side of the room where reason couldn't reach it, "we need to talk about the house." I stirred a cup I wasn't going to drink. "What about it?" "It's a lot," she said, and both the vagueness and the accuracy made me smile. "Maintenance. Security. The grounds. I can't stand how much space goes unused. It's obscene, honestly. Think of all the good we could do. If we sell, we can take that money and build something that matters. A platform. A network. A scholarship pipeline. We could be in press features about doing the right thing." "We?" I asked. "Well, me. But you know what I mean. Your legacy. My execution. Our impact. The house," I said, "is mine. For now." Her eyes brightened like a person who sees a bend in the road and assumes it is the finish line. "For now," she repeated. "Exactly. I'm not asking you to sleep on a bench. You could move into a lovely condo. Something with an elevator and a concierge so I don't have to worry. I'll handle the sale. I have a stager. I have a photographer. Listings that pop on Tuesdays. I know the cadence." "You know the cadence," I agreed, "of things that are yours." This would have been the moment to fight. It would have been satisfying the way slamming a door is satisfying. Instead, I took my tea to the breakfast nook and sat. Lark followed, thumbs tapping her screen, an orchestra of tiny decisions. Her ponytail made the same motion it made when she was 5 and thought determination could lift her into a tree. "You're 70, she said gently, which is one of those sentences that claims to describe a fact while trying to rearrange the furniture of your life. Wouldn't you rather wake up in a space that fits? This house was perfect for a family. It's a museum now. Museums are where you learn how to look at things, I said, and then I let myself do what old women are not often allowed to do. I spoke plainly. The house is yours by right of inheritance. Not by right of convenience. Not by right of impatience. Not by right of a business plan that needs an angel investor with my last name. Her face changed. Not dramatically. The lip tightened. The brow adjusted. You could miss it if you hadn't kissed that brow 1,000 times. You'd say that, she murmured. Weaponizing words. You've always been theatrical when you're scared. I am not scared, I said. I am awake. She left the room with a little exhale that had all the old years in it, the toddler sigh, the teenager sigh. The sigh she gave when her first marriage fell apart in a paper-thin apartment with a window that looked onto an alley where people collected mistakes like recyclables. In the morning, I called my attorney. Are you certain? Pamela asked. She has a voice that was taught not to surprise anyone. I am, I said. For once, I'd like to make a decision before it is made for me. We signed before lunch. It felt like opening a gate I hadn't noticed I'd been leaning against. The couple was young, not in years but in belief. They stood in my garden and told me where they'd hang the swing, and their children, twin boys with knees that already had grass stains in their future, studied the lemon tree as if it might be an oracle. It's a lot of house, the husband said, awed and afraid the way decent men are in the presence of good fortune. It's a lot of work, I said, and a lot of blessing. Take both. They offered full price, a clean closing, and the sort of gratitude that is a better fragrance than anything you can spray on your wrists. I noticed that the wife's mother watched me as if she'd been sent to study the difference between letting go and giving up. When Lark came downstairs, deodorant fresh and armed with a list titled Pre-Sale Action Items, I told her. The house is under contract, I said. The buyers are the Walshes. He's a pediatrician. She teaches 3rd grade. They have a mother who remembers every error she ever made and is determined to spot it before her daughter does. You did what? Lark asked, each word the size of a stone. I sold my house, I said. So I can live my own old age without waiting for someone to grant me the permission that being alive already grants me. You sold my future, she said. No, I said, I bought my present. If you have ever tried to argue with a person whose rage is more athletic than your patience, you know what happened next. A studio-quality litany, a discography of disappointments, a history rewritten to make me the obstacle and her the protagonist who has been asked to carry the plot without pay. I let her finish. Then I set the timer that lives in my mind for grief and gave us both an hour to stop saying what could not be unsaid. The weekend brought staging trucks. Lark had hired them on Thursday, and by Saturday morning they were unrolling rugs as if unrolling a personality. My books became neutral spines. Harold's blue chair migrated to the garage where cardboard boxes have the humility to stay silent. I told her twice, 3 times, that none of this was necessary, that the house was pending sale, and any alterations would complicate the closing. You're scared, she said kindly in the voice people use when dismissing someone. It's a lot to process. Let me carry the logistics. You go sip tea. On Sunday, the Walshes arrived with their parents earlier than planned. It was an old-fashioned courtesy visit. They wanted, they said, to look at the rooms together, to bless the decision with their older eyes. When they stepped into the foyer, they met Lark instructing a worker to remove the brass house numbers because numbers are like names, they're personal. Excuse me, Mrs. Walsh's mother said, straightening into her full, formidable height. Who are you? I'm the seller's daughter, Lark answered, clipboard at attention. The house is not on the market to you. Please contact our agent. Mr. Walsh, who spends his days calming small people who are in big distress, dialed the non-emergency line. His voice was steady. There was a misunderstanding at an address where a sale contract had been executed and alterations were underway without authorization. He asked only for help in clarifying rights. You can tell a good man by the way he defines help. The patrol car drew up as the worker slid the last screw from the house numbers. A second car idled behind. The older officer had a face like the inside of a leather glove. The younger one had posture you could measure by. Afternoon, the older officer said. I'm told we're working on 2 different definitions of owner in this space. Let's get some facts. This is my mother's residence, Lark said immediately. I live here. I'm preparing it for sale. Those people have made an offer we have not accepted. The house is under contract, I said. I am the seller. The Walshes are the buyers. My daughter has not moved with us to this new reality. You can't, Lark began. Ma'am, the officer said, turning to her without sharpness, do you have documentation authorizing this work? I have authority, she said. By right. What right? He asked, the question like a carpenter's level. She found the word that had glowed for her since Thursday night. Inheritance, she said. She told me it's mine by right of inheritance. Eventually, I said softly. The older officer looked at me. Would you like to call your attorney? He asked. Yes, I said, because sometimes the best thing you can do is invite another witness into the room where a family's echo distorts words. The younger officer escorted the Walshes and their parents to the porch. The older one stayed inside with the worker, who had the good sense to wish himself elsewhere, and with Lark, who had the kind of anger that mistakes volume for power. A second staging truck arrived, a coordinator hopped out, and the scene acquired an extra layer of absurdity, ladders like punctuation, paint samples like options. Here's what's going to happen, the older officer said after he spoke with Pamela by phone and confirmed the existence of a valid contract and a scheduled closing. No more alterations. No removal of fixtures. No directing of work. If you live here, you may collect your personal items over the next 48 hours. Any attempt to continue asserting control over the property will be considered trespass and damage to property. You can't jail me for touching my own home, Lark said. He didn't laugh. Ma'am, I do not want to jail anyone. But I am going to ask you to stop. Right now. There are moments you can see from farther away than your own body. This was one. Lark's mouth opened, then decided to invite trouble. Do whatever you think you can do, she said. They did what they're trained to do. Firm voices, careful hands, a respectful reading of rights. She stiffened and hissed my name, which is the part that will never stop being the hardest to remember. Neighbors who claim never to notice anything noticed this immediately. Lark was placed in the back of the cruiser and taken to the station, which is not a terrible place, but is very good at making you reconsider. The Walshes stood uncertainly in the living room that was more theirs than mine in every way except the emotional one. We didn't mean, Mrs. Walsh began, and I shook my head. You meant to protect your home, I said. And you did. I'll come to the station and explain. Do you want us to press charges? The older officer had asked the Walshes before they left. No, Mr. Walsh said. We want a quiet move-in and a small life. I can help with that, I said. At the station, the desk sergeant had a tablet and a patience I envied. There is a choreography to these things that makes dignity possible if everyone is willing. I told the whole story without embroidery, the overheard sentence, the sale, the definition of inheritance that is only true when a heartbeat is not. I asked them to release my daughter to me. I used the voice I seldom used as a mother, the one that says I can still carry this if you will let me. You understand she was actively directing damage, the older officer said gently when he came into the room. We could book this as property destruction and trespass. I understand, I said, that she was trying to move faster than pain lets you move. I understand that sometimes we call it a plan when what we really want is a way to feel better before we're ready to change. I am not asking you to pretend she did nothing. I'm asking you to let me do something now. They released her with a warning, a document with boxes checked, and the kind of cool shame that makes an adult feel smaller than the furniture. We rode home without speaking. She watched the city like a stranger, and I watched her as if she were both my child and someone I had just met. At the house, which was now a staging area for regret, we sat at the kitchen table with 2 glasses of water between us like referees. You humiliated me, she said. I prevented you from being charged, I said. And I humiliated myself first by forgetting you can't reason a person out of a fear they've decided to live inside. You told me the house is mine. I told you the house is yours when I am no longer here, I said. It was a sentence you decided to finish differently. I needed the capital, she said, smaller now. Every mentor says the same thing: think bigger. You think bigger by starting with a big story. You build bigger by starting with a sturdy ethic, I said. You're moralizing, she said weakly. I'm remembering, I said. The difference is that memory is a ledger. It keeps two columns. Yours contains love and exasperation. Mine contains the day I gave you my last $10 in college so you could buy a plane ticket to a conference you were sure would change your life. You didn't go because your boyfriend got the flu, and I didn't ask for the money back. I am not a stranger to generosity. I am not unfamiliar with your appetite. She put her head in her hands. For a full minute the house listened to us breathe. You're going to sell, she said without looking up. I already sold, I said. You're going to take the money and disappear. I am going to take the money and live. Where? Paris first, I said, a sentence that tasted like citrus. Of course, she said. Paris. You can come visit when you learn the difference between asking for help and asking for everything. That night she packed. I did not watch. There is no respectful way to watch a person decide what they can carry. She left before dawn with 3 boxes and the ring light that had become a symbol of her need to be seen. The house was suddenly full of echo. I have always believed echo is what a space speaks when it misses you on purpose. On Monday, we met the Walshes and my attorney to sign a friendly addendum. No fixtures would be removed. The lemon tree would be loved. Any staging remnants would be gone within 48 hours. Mrs. Walsh's mother stood with me while the others initialed. You did the right thing, she said, which is a sentence that has more versions than recipes. You sold before your daughter turned your heart into a budget line. I will be blamed, I said. Of course, she said. That is what mothers teach by surviving. Closing day arrived like a breath. I took one last lap through the rooms. You do not say goodbye to walls. You say goodbye to the people you were inside them. In the pantry, I found the grocery list Harold had written the week he tried to make dinner for our 30th anniversary. Lemons, rosemary, faith. He had always written jokes on lists. I pressed the paper flat and let it be what it had become, proof that we had been ourselves here. The cashier's check sat heavy in the envelope. I put it on the kitchen counter and made myself look at it without turning it into a future. Money is not a miracle. Money is a tool that behaves like your character. I resolved not to let mine act spoiled simply because it had been handed something shiny. Before I left, I walked into the garden. The lemon tree was exactly as it had been and not the same at all. I tied a small ribbon to one of the branches for the boys and left a note in the mailbox about the hour right before sunset when the fruit looks like the house learned how to glow. The first place I went after the closing was the bank. The second was a travel agency that still smelled like ink. The woman there had hair the color of a well-read novel and a way of saying, like a small applause. Between her and the map, we arranged an old woman's rebellion, a 1-bedroom apartment in the 11th with tall windows and a balcony too small to hold a problem, a month in Provence where the markets lay their hearts on tables, a week on the coast because water forgives without promising. I sent Lark a message with the new address and the dates. I told her the truth. I had sold the house to buy a comfortable old age, to travel and live a beautiful life I could maintain without waiting for permission. I told her I would not be a character in her marketing copy. I signed it with love that doesn't require agreement to remain love. Then I did something that surprised me. I made a list of the people and places that had kept me alive when it would have been easier to float. The hospice where Harold had been allowed to be a person who was dying rather than a problem. The neighborhood pantry that pretended it was a cupboard so dignity could do its shopping. The community garden that taught me that coaxing basil out of stubborn dirt is a discipline with rewards. I wrote checks the way you prune roses, not to harm, but to create room for bloom. On my last evening in the house that remembered my life like a song, I sat in the blue chair and wrote Harold a letter I will never mail. Dear you. I heard our daughter wish for a shortcut, and she mistook me for the obstruction. I sold our house so she couldn't take the last of you to build the first of something that didn't require the cost she thought it did. I am going to France to remember that there are places where people look at paintings long enough to resemble patience. I will learn to ask for directions in a language that might not forgive my accent. Imagine me learning. Imagine me getting it right on the 3rd try. Imagine me coming home with a jar of mustard that claims to be historic. Imagine me laughing alone and not being afraid of the sound. I will sit under a plane tree and eat a tomato that reminds me of the time we tried to grow them and produced only hope. I will forgive myself for the ways I kept the house as a shrine and forgive our daughter for trying to convert a shrine into seed money. I will not forgive envy. I will simply stop feeding it. Please understand that being alive in the face of your death is not a betrayal. It is a job I am finally qualified for. Love. M. The plane to Paris lifted like a sentence that knew how to end itself. My bag was light. I had packed 2 dresses, a raincoat, a small pair of shoes that looked like they respected sidewalks, and the photograph of Harold in the backyard pretending he didn't know I was taking it. In Paris, morning arrived carrying bread. I learned to order coffee without turning it into a speech. I spoke to the woman at the flower stall until my verbs cooperated. I discovered that every city has corners where it keeps its humor, and I learned mine. The bus driver who told me that in his neighborhood the pigeons walk as if they are late for work. The baker who let me taste 3 kinds of apricot jam because choosing is a step in a dance. I made friends with a museum guard who said I look at paintings like I'm borrowing courage. I do not know what that means, but I wrote it down because it felt like a compliment for a life that required stamina. On clear afternoons I sat by the river and watched other people take pictures as proof. I took none because my memory was suddenly very good at work. I kept calling home, even though home had made new people. The Walsh boys sent me a video of the swing attached to the lemon tree, and I cried in a way their mother pretended not to see on the screen. She held the phone very close when she said thank you for the ribbon. One morning, 3 weeks in, my phone buzzed. Lark. The screen showed a message that was not a plan. It was a sentence that built a bridge instead of a stage. I'm sorry. It is a small thing that takes a big person. I told her I accepted. I told her I would be in the market till noon and at the park until the light failed. I told her to call if she wanted to talk about what sorry could build. She called. Her voice was careful, like a person carrying water. I almost drove past the house, she said. I wanted to see who was parked in our driveway. And then I realized I don't want to be the kind of person who haunts her own past. That is a decision, I said. Decisions deserve witnesses. I am your witness. I have a mentor, she said. She told me to prove my idea by helping 10 people for free. If 3 pay after, I have something worth charging for. I helped 6 last week. For booked. I made money without writing a press release. I didn't even use my ring light. The secret is that there is no secret, I said. You're in Paris, she said. Are you happy? Yes, I said. Not constantly. Not aggressively. Just properly. In Provence, the markets taught me humility. Tomatoes the size of conviction. Olives in jars like small planets. Cheese that introduced itself before you asked its name. I rented a bicycle with a basket and filled it with apricots that made memory do cartwheels. I cooked in a kitchen that knew it was temporary and therefore asked to be respected. I made soup that tasted like forward motion. I found a chapel on a hill and climbed there in my plain shoes. On the path, I picked up a smooth gray stone the size of a pause and kept it in my pocket to remind myself to stop before I spoke. It worked 3 times out of 5. That is a better average than any other method I know. On the coast, I walked until the horizon didn't scare me. I let the water be a teacher that never made fun of my handwriting. I wrote Harold another letter in my head and did not write it down because sometimes the heart needs to keep something unshared so it doesn't feel like public art. Meanwhile, life at home was not waiting. The Walshes discovered a hairline crack in the back terrace and called me, not because they needed money, but because they wanted me to know that they were learning the language of the house. We spoke for half an hour about grout and hope. When we hung up, I sat on a bench in the shade and laughed, because being included for no practical reason is a gift I had forgotten to ask for. Lark sent me pictures of flyers she had printed for her sessions. Returnship sessions. 1 hour to get back in. The font was honest without being shy. She told me she had stood in a library room donated by the city and taught 3 women how to talk about their volunteer years without apologizing. 2 booked paid time. She bought herself a coffee with the money and sent me a photograph of the cup as if it were a certificate. One afternoon, she called with a voice that meant she wanted to tell the truth. I said something awful, she said. You heard it. I heard it. I don't know where it came from. It came from fear, I said. There is a part of you that still believes love is a permission slip to use what you're close to. I taught that part of you to walk to the porch instead of the kitchen. It will keep trying to get back in. You can lock it out without losing the rest of yourself. I wanted the house to finance who I thought I had to become, she said. I forgot the way you financed my actual life when I needed it. We were both wrong, I said. Me, for keeping the house as a museum and pretending that was a kind of loyalty. You, for thinking a legacy is a lever. We talked about boundaries the way people talk about fences in neighborhoods that are trying not to become gated communities. We picked times for calls that respected the ocean between us. We named the things that would make us reach for each other. Emergencies, mistakes we couldn't unmake alone, good news that deserved an echo. When my month ended, I stood in the apartment doorway and thanked the air for tolerating my learning curve. I pressed the gray stone to the balcony railing and left it on the windowsill where the next tenant might think it had always been there. Back home, I found a sunlit apartment with floors that creak like polite conversation and a kitchen sized for the number of people who actually eat there. I bought fewer things than I thought I needed and found out I was right about that. I put Harold's blue chair by a window that faces a tree that minds its own business. The lemon tree on my old hill had grown. The Walshes invited me to see the boys' first successful swing, the kind where both feet leave the ground and gravity forgives you for presumption. Mrs. Walsh's mother brought lemonade even though it was redundant, and we laughed. On the way back to my car, I passed two neighbors who had perfected the art of being over-friendly to new residents and distant to old ones. They stopped me with the kindness that smells like curiosity. "You're looking well," one said. "I am well," I answered. "We miss your house," the other said, which is a very strange sentence if you think about it too long. "My house is fine," I said. It found people who needed a roof with an opinion. That evening, Lark came over for dinner in my new place. She brought bread she had baked and the humility to admit it was mostly the oven's work. I made soup that tasted like the part of the journey where the road stopped asking for tolls. We ate without decoration. She told me she had earned enough to pay her own rent this month. I told her I had learned to ask directions in French without apologizing at the start. We celebrated both victories without ranking them. "Do you ever regret selling?" she asked as we stacked plates. "Yes," I said. Regret is not proof of error. It is proof of memory. I also regret not learning to be loud sooner. I regret letting you think you could spend my life to buy one for yourself. I regret that grief made me quiet when it should have made me stubborn. But I do not regret deciding that my old age would be comfortable and my days would be beautiful because I arranged them to be so. "Can I ask you a hard question?" she said. "You always have. When you heard me say that sentence, did you ever think I meant it?" "I think you meant the part of it that felt like relief," I said. "I think you forgot that relief is not the same as love." She nodded. We were quiet. The apartment made the little sounds of a place learning who lives there now. Sometimes people expect a grand ending. A parade. A speech. A scene where the one who betrayed you arrives with an apology in a box. That is theater. Real life is a series of small, merciful corrections. The police came because someone had to decide who owned the door. They took my daughter away because they had to prove that consequences were real. I told the truth and brought her home because love is a consequence too, one that looks soft until you see what it refuses to allow. Months later, in late autumn, a letter arrived with a Paris postmark because one of my new friends there likes to send me postcards as proof that the world is still there when I'm not looking at it. It had a photograph of a market stall piled with peppers. On the back she had written, "Come back before the winter oranges arrive." They hum. I plan to stand under a foreign sky and say thank you in a language I am still learning. I plan to carry only the bags I can lift myself. I plan to call my daughter when the Louvre makes me cry. I plan to live a beautiful life because beauty is not an award, it is a practice. As for Lark, she keeps a copy of the incident report in a folder marked lesson. She tells clients that the first step of any return is to name the place you left. She does not use my house in her speeches. She uses her own mistakes, which are more portable. She has 3 packages now, all fairly priced, and she loses sleep sometimes because success is noisy in the beginning. She sends me photographs of the sun on her kitchen floor, and asks me if this is what contentment looks like. I tell her it looks like floors and soup and a budget that adds up without resentment. We do not speak about the sentence anymore. It happened. It found its place. It does not have the last word. The last word belongs to the lemon tree that held both a swing and a scare and kept making fruit anyway. So if you're listening because you share a wall with someone you love and you've heard them wish for an easier life without you in it, hear this from me. You're allowed to rearrange the furniture of your years. You are allowed to sell the house and buy your time. You are allowed to pack a suitcase not as an escape, but as a return to yourself. You are allowed to tell the police the truth even when the truth makes everyone wince. You are allowed to be alive longer than someone else's patience. And you are allowed to go to France to remember that you have always belonged to yourself. 2 weeks after I heard my daughter whisper that I was in the way, the police took her to a place where echo sounds different. I brought her home. I sold the house. I kept my life. I learned how to say good morning to the sane without frightening it. And when I came back, I found the new lemon tree in my new neighborhood and stood beneath it at dusk while the light did that generous thing it does when it forgives everyone for still being here.
So, another story of my grandmother has end. And be clicking here, you will have when more such stories.